So I know, Vlad, as we've been covering the protests and sort of talking to people who have taken to the streets, this is what I've noticed, that there are certainly some people who are part of organized groups who have been activists for a very, very long time. But the vast majority of people that you see in these protests are people that, you know, haven't protested for anything or haven't done it in a long time. They're not part of an organized group, but many, many people have sort of taken up the rallying cry of Black Lives Matter, whether it's a hashtag, whether it's something on social media, a T-shirt, they make a sign. It's become a slogan that is pulled in not just Black people, but all kinds of people.
That's right. It's an excellent point that you make, Anne-Marie. So we want to bring in Jamil Smith. He's a senior writer for Rolling Stone, and he's got an article out about the power of Black Lives Matter. It's called Black Lives Matter, How the Movement That's Changing America Was Built and Where It Goes. And it highlights several movements that have led to what could be a potential turning point in America. And Jamil joins us now to talk about this. Good to see you, man. So these protests over police brutality, we talked about this, Anne-Marie and I. They feel very different from protests in the past. Even if you just go back 6 years, I was in Ferguson covering that, and the feel there was very different. The number of people that were out protesting were mostly African American. The Black Lives Matter, even as it trended on Twitter, tended to be retweeted and tended to be focused on people of color. You didn't have the wide range of ethnicities supporting the movement the way you do today. So I guess walk us through that and what's changed.
Right. I think what the three Black Lives Matter organizers who I speak to for this article, Opal Tometi, Alicia Garza, and Patrisse Cullors, what they have done, what they've accomplished in these 7 years since they've introduced that phrase, is they've raised the floor for our expectations. They've said Black Lives Matter, which really, when you think about it, is really the very basest thing we can ask for, that Black lives matter to the rest of America. They've said, look, Black lives mattering to everyone else should be the very least that we should ask. Now, everyone seems to be more comfortable with that phrase. Corporations are now embracing it. People are slapping it on their statements after George Floyd was killed. People are putting it on signs. We've seen these, immense multicultural crowds, both here and around the globe. I think that, folks are feeling more comfortable asking for more radical demands. They're saying defund the police, like saying reimagine the ways that our societies can protect themselves. Let's ask for different ways that we can imagine how public safety can be designed. I think these are important questions that America should be asking itself, especially since the rates of, in terms of disproportionality, have not really gone down. In fact, you're seeing, as I note in the piece, Black folks are still getting killed, more than 3 times, up to 4 times as much as white people, despite the fact that killings, overall are still going down.
I think there's still a tremendous amount of misunderstanding about Black Lives Matter. What is it? Is it an organization, or is it a philosophy? Is it a hashtag, or is it something more? So can you just give us sort of like the basic rundown? How did it start, what it was in the beginning versus what it is right now?
Certainly. It started with Alicia Garza in the wake of the Zimmerman verdict that night. In 2013, July 2013, that night putting up a viral Facebook post that had the words Black Lives Matter in it. And Patrisse Cullors was a fellow organizer who she knew, from previous organizing work, hashtagged those words, Black Lives Matter. And then later on that night, Opal Tometi, who's an East Coast-based organizer who knew Alicia, but didn't actually know Patrisse at the time, reached out to Alicia and asked, hey, how can I help? Saw the post that said, I know, there are skills here that I can apply. How can I help? And the 3 of them together created the Black Lives Matter Global Network. That is an organization. That is not just a hashtag or just simply the words introduced into our global lexicon. It is an organization that now, currently has 13 chapters here in the United States and 3 in Canada. So it is a working organization that still, is folded within the larger network of the movement for Black lives. So we should understand that and understand, that it is, folks who are actively working as a civil rights organization.
And why that's important, I think, to break down the history, Jamil, is there's a Monmouth University poll that I know you've probably seen that was taken a few days after George Floyd's death that found that 71% of white respondents deemed racism and discrimination, quote, a big problem in the United States. And that is up 26 points from 2015. So nearly 80% of Americans and 75% of white Americans told pollsters that the protests that we were seeing in the wake of George Floyd's anger was either fully or partially justified. Again, that is just such a difference in what we saw after Ferguson, and certainly very, very different from where we were after Trayvon Martin.
Indeed. And one of the things, unfortunately, that I lament in this article is how many folks need to die in order for folks to understand this. And, these numbers steadily creep up. And still, I think 71% is still pretty low. I mean, we have had systemic racism in this country since before it was a country. I mean, we were talking about the introducing of chattel slavery more than 400 years ago. In a previous article, I referred to racism as a pre-existing condition of this country. It's really a disease, a comorbidity that really, serves to hasten the death of our democracy, this republic. And if we don't get rid of it, if we don't serve to treat it, effectively, this American experiment is going to, go down. It's going to die. And it's going to die a lot faster than it would have otherwise. And I think we need to understand that. We need to, I think we understand that urgency. We're seeing it in the streets, but I think that people need to understand that, the remedial education that folks are doing right now, forming book clubs and asking friends, like, where do I donate my resources? It's just the first step. It's a needed step, but it's just the first step. We need a lot more action going forward.
So the other thing that I find quite remarkable about this moment that we're living in is the way in which, and you sort of brought this up, corporations have embraced Black Lives Matter to the point where at times if employees, criticize, heavily criticize the movement, or maybe they tweet like all lives matter or something like that, their jobs may be on the line. These companies don't want to be associated with people who are rejecting this. And just as an aside, so every year we do an interview about the Edelman Trust Barometer, right? And what the conclusion was for 2020 was that overwhelmingly across the world, people have lost faith in the institutions they typically depend on, like government, church, and they are looking to corporations to fill that void. They want corporations who say that they are for the environment or for women or whatever. So I find it very, very interesting that corporations many of them are backing Black Lives Matter. Why do you think they're doing that now? Corporations typically don't do anything unless, there's a good financial benefit. They're businesses.
Well, unfortunately, I know that there's going to be a touch of cynicism here in my response, but unfortunately, it's because they see a lot of white faces in the streets. They see a lot of folks in the streets who, look like they're sons and daughters who are taking the sides of these Black victims. And I think that to some degree, I think that may have a lot to do with it. I think that, you're seeing a cause become more commercially, popular. And that means to say, hey, wait a minute, we may actually lose dollars if this, if we go against this particular cause. Wait a minute, we have employees saying all lives matter. That could cost us our bottom line. Maybe we should, take some severe action here. We should actually throw some millions, the way of Black Lives Matter. The ultimate goal here, I think, is really for an America where Black people don't need white people to save us. And really, at the board, the heads of these corporations, unfortunately, still are predominantly, almost sometimes exclusively white people. And I think we really need to understand who is in charge here of these dollars when they throw these dollars towards these civil rights organizations, towards these causes. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but we need to, take it for what it is and understand it as just part of the journey and not, simply as the solution to the ultimate struggle.
It's a great point that you make. I mean, at the end of the day, as you say, Jamil, it's great that certain companies donate to these causes, but the boardrooms are still fairly homogenous. The people who run these organizations, the people who own the media companies, the people who own the sports teams, that's, I think, what people want to see a change in. And until that happens, companies can donate as much money as they possibly can, or they can put out ads like Pepsi did a couple of years ago, seemingly, because I think it's interesting, the Pepsi ad that came out that seemingly suggested that you could just give a Pepsi to a police officer and you would solve all of the racism and all the problems in the world was interesting because it had worked in the past, right? When Coca-Cola came out with "I'd like to teach the world to sing," was at the height of or at the end of the 1960s, the beginning of the 1970s. We were still involved in Vietnam. We were still suffering the effects of several assassinations in this country, and people did buy into that message. But we live in a very different world now. You can't pull the wool over people's eyes now and say, "Hey, we're giving money to a cause, or we're doing campaigns that seemingly support what the protesters are after," without changing the internal structure of an organization or of society.
Right, and also you can't reboot the Flower Child movement with an ad. You can't say, yeah, give have if a starlet hand a police officer a Pepsi, and all of a sudden now we're all putting flowers in our hair again and walking around saying peace, love, dope. It's just not going to work. That's just not how that's not how movements work. And so I think what corporations really need to understand is movement politics. How do movement politics work? How should their roles fit into movement politics? I think, frankly, they need to understand themselves as allies. How can they best be allies to movement politics? How should they stand in the background to movement politics and not try to be in the forefront? And if they can help, great. And if they can't help, then just be off to the side and not help. Just make sure you don't get in the way.
Move, get out the way. Now I got that song in my head. Jamil, thank you so much.
Indeed. Thank you.